It started, this idea, right here in Colorado, when Jane and several other women were sitting around in a garden, and they thought, we have to do something about this. Why can't we? So just these few women from Colorado, they had this idea, and they went to DC, and they made it happen. And it's law. It is law. This statue is going to be built. This monument is going to be erected in Washington, D.C. to the women's suffrage movement. And when we talk about the women's suffrage movement, which I think is something that, for some people, I say that and they're like, yes, got it. But for most people, that's not something we learn about, right? In your history textbooks, right now, if you have kids in school, go home, open up their textbooks, send me an email, let me know if there's anything about the women's suffrage movement in those textbooks. Because typically there's not, which is such a shame. The suffrage movement is the longest and largest political and social movement in American history. It spans decades. It lasted for 74 plus years. And there's no monument to these women on the mall. Your kids aren't learning about it in school. This is the largest enfranchisement of a group of people in world history. Overnight, an amendment passed to the Constitution. Overnight, over 74 years, right? So this amendment passes to the Constitution, and the next day, 21 million women have the right to vote that didn't have the right to vote the day before. This is the largest enfranchisement of a group of people in world history. And there's no monument to the women who fought that fight for generations in Washington, D.C. And here's who we're talking about. We're talking about Susan B. Anthony. We're talking about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Alice Paul. These women are titans of our story, and they were fighting for our equality. Suffrage, the right to vote, that was just a means to an end. That was a mechanism for equality. What they wanted was equal pay for equal work. What they wanted was to be able to be represented in Congress. What they wanted was to be able to divorce their husbands. That's what they wanted, right? But they didn't have the right to any of those things. And the right to vote was a means to an end for equality. And so that's what they fought for. Those women deserve a place in our national story. In our national story, the beating heart of that is Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. So the hard part is done. Jane, Maggie, Kyle, and a group of folks from Colorado, they did the hard part. They went to Congress, and they got, this is actually an amazing part of the story, unanimous support. This was passed through the House with 100% of the vote in favor. That doesn't happen very often, certainly not now, right? This is so clearly needed that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You can see the need, the necessity, how long overdue this actually is. So the legislation is passed. We now have congressional authority to establish a monument in Washington, D.C. to these women. And the way that monuments and memorials are built, I think unless you're in this space, why would you ever know this? The way that monuments and memorials are built, Congress passes legislation and says, we give this monument permission to be built in our nation's capital, and they name a nonprofit. And that nonprofit is in charge of raising the funds, hiring the design team, overseeing the construction, and that's a process that takes many, many years. We're probably talking about 6-7 years in total. Every monument memorial you've seen in Washington, D.C. has been built that way. If you go and you walk the mall and you see Martin Luther King or World War II, Eisenhower, if you see these monuments, I'm sure you think to yourself that the federal government funded those. It did not, right? Those monuments and memorials are privately funded. So the way that it works, Congress gives you the authority to build a monument. They name a nonprofit who's in charge of the fundraising. That nonprofit has to raise the funds, hire the design team, build the thing, and once you do that, you hand it over to the National Park Service, and it is a national park site forever. As the National Park Service likes to say, they're in the forever business, right? So that's how this process works. Monuments and memorials are expensive to build. One of the most recent memorials that was just unveiled, if anybody's been to DC recently, the Eisenhower Memorial and $150 million. I don't think we're going to need to raise that much, but we do have a pretty big goal. We're going to need to raise about $50 million over the course of the next 4 years. But today, we don't have to raise $50 million. Today, we just need to get moving. We have been handed an enormous responsibility from Congress. They said, you, the Women's Suffrage National Monument Foundation, build this monument to women. It doesn't exist, right? There are no women on our national mall. That is an incredible responsibility, an incredible legacy to get to be a part of. So they hand you this responsibility, and then you're like, but could I have some money to do it? And they're like, no. You go ahead, you figure this out, right? Which is fine, because what they want is they want for Americans to feel ownership of this. That's the idea. So that's the mission that we have ahead of us. The very first thing that we have to do, right, so our legislation is passed, we have staff. The very next thing we have to do is figure out where this thing is going to go. That's called the site selection process. So we have to work with the National Park Service to figure out where in Washington, D.C. we are going to be able to put this monument. Here's the good news. There are no women on the National Mall. Now, that's only good news in this one way. They need us as much as we need them, right? So we are going to get a great site because our story, women's stories, matter. And the National Park Service knows that. So they're going to work with us over the course of the next year and a half to figure out exactly where this monument is going to go. But that process takes about $100,000. We have to hire an engineering firm who has to do site selection studies. They have to do environmental studies. There's a lot of work that goes into selecting your site, and you have to hire this very one specific firm to guide you through it. So eventually we have to raise $50 million, but today, in this capital campaign, we need to raise $100,000 so that we can start moving on our site selection process. So I'm here today, right, to first off, to share this project with you. It is so important that every woman and girl in this country knows, first off, that this history matters, right, that this story matters, that our equality matters, that it was hard won, that a whole lot of women had to fight for a long time to get it. That's the first thing, that's the most important thing. Next, we need people to know about this project, right? And so that's why I'm so glad that you're here. People need to know. They need to know why this matters, and they need to know that it's happening. So I would ask for your help when you leave here. Tell your family, tell your friends, spread the word about this effort. Every woman, every girl needs to know that this is happening. And lastly, if you are able to donate and contribute to this project, you are going to be the reason that we are able to build this monument. Congress passed the legislation, they did their part. Now we have to do our part. And so that's why I'm here today. We have giving levels starting at $1,000 and up. If you donate, now listen, not asking anybody to do this today, but I just want you to know, if you or your company donates $1 million or more, your name will be on the site. That's a national park rule. Any donor who donates to a national park site, $1 million or up, gets name recognition on the site. But we have giving levels a lot lower than that, right? Starting at 1,000 and up, so don't be scared. However, I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you for caring about this project that was born here in Colorado by just a couple of women who had an idea and a whole lot of heart and a whole lot of perseverance, because that's what it took. They believed they could do the impossible, and they did it. And now we're here, and we're gonna make history. So thank you for being here, thank you for being a part of this. I hope that we can have your support for this first stage, the most important stage, which is where are we gonna get to put these women? And I'm just grateful to meet you. So I didn't have a chance to say hi to most of you, so please don't leave without coming over, saying hi. I'd love to thank you just for coming. And I'm here if you want to talk, but mostly just thank you for helping us to make history.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Has an actual monument been designed?
So the monument gets designed once the site is selected. So, and Jane can speak to this a little bit if you'd like to, Jane, but the way that sculptors and design teams need to work, they could give us a site that's an acre, right, of gorgeous big grassland, and they could tell us, hey, your monument can't be tall because you can't mess up the sight lines to the Washington Monument, right? In Washington, D.C., sight lines are everything. So we could get a site that's incredible, and they could say, you've got this amazing site, but it's got to be kind of low profile because people need to be able to see the Washington Monument. They have to stand here and still be able to see that. Or we could get a site somewhere where it's smaller, but we can go really huge and big and tall, right? So site selection is absolutely key because what the monument is completely dependent on the site. Yeah.
Do you have any say in where this site selection is? Like, how do you ensure that
Yes.
you're not going to be just like put in the back roads?
Yes, great question. So we absolutely do. So the way that the site selection process works, we hire this engineering firm and we work through the process with the National Park Service. But it's DC, so the more political power you have, the better, right? So, and we have that, right? So we passed this through Congress with bipartisan support. We are going right now to all 23 women senators to ask them to be on our honorary committee. In a couple of months, we'll be inviting in all former living first ladies to be our honorary chairs. I have already had some conversations. I expect everyone will say yes. So building this organization, right, we're in the early moments, but building this organization is all about knowing how to build those foundational blocks that mean that when you operate in Washington, D.C., you have the clout that you need to achieve the mission that you set out to achieve. So that's what we're working on right now.